am the new generation of scary stories. It's time to retire the boring, emotionless voiceovers. With my voice and melody, you will experience the full spectrum of emotions. Subscribe if you like my videos, and also send me your scary stories to my email. And please indicate how you would like me to introduce you in the video. Good luck. This is going to be a somewhat long and controversial story, but it happened to me. I was driving home from visiting a friend who lives several hours away from me, 6 hours to be exact. I hadn't seen my friend in a very long time, and instead of leaving early from my visit, like I should have, I left their place at like 8 p.m. I messaged my husband when I left and told him not to wait up for me, as I wouldn't be home till almost 3 a.m. We said goodnight, and he told me to drive safely. The highways that I would take to get home aren't major thoroughfares. I live in rural Canada, so 90% of my drive would be on small, two-lane highways. It's actually a beautiful drive through gorgeous countryside. So I'm into my drive about 4 hours. When things get weird, I'm literally in the middle of nowhere when my GPS starts acting up. After about 5 minutes, the thing literally just dies on me. No problem though. I'll just use my phone. No sooner did I load the directions on my phone, and it starts acting up. Screen flashing on, off. The coordinates started spinning. Really weird. Then, just like the GPS, it just died. Still not a huge deal. I'm only a couple hours from home. I can find my way. So I turn on the radio. I had been listening to my music on my phone, but it died. Normally, at this distance from the city, you can still pick up a station or two, but nothing. Just this really weird static. It was the most beautiful, calm, clear summer night, and the stars are so vivid when you're out of the city. But literally, out of nowhere, this weird green fog started to appear. As I continued driving, the fog got thicker to the point I'm only driving like 40 kilometers per hour. On a highway, I was literally just doing 120 on. Then, literally out of nowhere, my car died while driving. I drove a standard, so I just threw it in neutral to coast as far as possible. When I finally came to a complete stop, the fog was so thick, it was actually in the car. I could barely see my hands on the steering wheel, and it had a terrible taste. Next thing I know, it's daylight out, and I'm being yelled at by two CN workers. I was still in a daze. It was almost like I was frozen. The workers are screaming at me. I guess my car is parked on private railroad property. They ask how I got past security with my car. Why am I there? I couldn't answer. I literally had no idea where I was. They told me to GTFO before they call the cops and file trespassing charges. I tried to explain what happened. I told them the car died on the side of the highway. I went to start my car to show them it was dead, and after some heavy hesitation, it finally started. I couldn't believe where I was. I was literally inside a Canadian National Rail yard. How did I get here? There was a 9-foot fence surrounding the compound and a locked security gate at the front. I asked the worker where I was, and when he told me, I was in disbelief. I was at least 100 kilometers from where I last remembered. As I'm driving out, I instantly remembered my husband. He must be worried sick. What time is it even? How did I get here? My phone was still completely dead, so I couldn't MSG him. When I finally got home, it was 3 p.m. I tried to explain what happened to my husband, and he was in total disbelief. We both were. The next day, I went to the phone store to see if my phone could be fixed. They said it might take a week or so, but it was repairable. The very next day, I noticed something was wrong. I felt awful. My hair seemed to be falling out, and I started to get a really bad rash. So we went to the hospital. I told the hospital what happened to me a couple days earlier, and they thought I was joking. It wasn't until my blood work came back an hour later that they took me seriously. I had radiation poisoning. They immediately put me in an isolation room. I spent a total of 21 days in the hospital before I was deemed non-radioactive. And when I got my phone back from the cell phone company, the last time my GPS pinged, it said I was 4,000 feet in the air. TLDR. I think I may have been abducted. This story kind of creeps me out even to this day, but I have a pretty good one. I lived in Mesa, Arizona when I was 10 years old. We lived in a rough area, but I was just a kid completely ignorant to the dangers of the world. I was walking back home from my friend's house, and my mother wanted me home by 9, and I'd always start walking back at around 8:40 to make sure I wasn't late. And it's only like a 7-minute walk a couple blocks from my house, so it wasn't a super long distance. It was around the time of year when the sun would set at 5:30 and be dark well before 7 p.m., so it was very much nighttime. As I'm walking, I hear a woman calling my name. I turned to look and see it was one of my mom's friends, but she didn't know her too well. However, I just saw that she was familiar and won't say a name, but I turned around and said hello and smiled. She walked up to me and told me my mom had called her and asked her to come get me and ride me back because something happened at my house. She said it was an emergency and that I needed to go with her and her husband, whom my family was also familiar with. I was only about 5 minutes from my house, but I was told it was an emergency, and I agreed to go with her. As I'm walking, I get this weird feeling in my gut and this shaking in my legs that I now today realize was my instincts being on high alert. I stopped for a minute and asked if we could call my mom, and she said my mother was in the hospital right now and that I need to hurry. Right as we were opening the door to the car, I hear my mother shout my name as loud as she can, and I turned on a dime and quickly walked towards my mom. My mom asked what's going on, and the woman replies and says that she was just giving me a ride home because she saw me was not the story she gave me, so I told my mother what she told me and asked what was going on. My mom just looked at me, and she could always tell when I'm lying versus when I'm telling the truth. The woman then goes to interrupt me, likely to lie, and my mom cuts her off and just stared back at her with the most shocked look ever, and these words still send shivers down my spine. She says in the most shocked voice ever, "You were trying to take my son." And the husband looks out the window, hurrying his wife in the car, and as I looked back towards him, I can see a syringe on the dashboard, leaning against the windshield that he grabs right as I see it. She gets in the car because at that point, my mom was ready to kill her and reached into her purse because she keeps a pocket knife. But they drove away. And right after they did, my mom looked at me and just burst into tears saying, "I'm almost lost you." My mom knew full well what was happening, and I was still too shaken to even say anything, and just hugged her back, and we went home. I was still in denial, and to cope, I would convince myself that maybe I wasn't in any danger. My family OFC never kept in contact with any of them, but my stepdad at the time submitted a tip to the police of the incident. When they caught up with him about 3 months later, we had found out that he was arrested for having CP on his computer and found restraints in his closet, as well as some containers of propofol. They found pictures of me from my mom's Facebook downloaded on his computer as well, leading them to believe that I was actually being watched for a good bit. I never liked talking about it because to this day, if I hadn't stopped for those 10 seconds to ask the woman to call my mom, I don't know where I'd be or if I'd even be alive right now making this comment. And while it may seem like something that would have easily been forgotten, it was never the case for me. I haven't even told my closest friends this story, but I might sometime soon. I asked my mom what happened that night, why she came looking for me. She described the same feeling I remembered feeling moments before I was almost abducted, just a lot sooner than I did, and just had the instinct that I was in danger. I'm not usually a lucky person. It seems the odds are always against me, but I always remember how lucky I was that night that my mom decided to listen to her instincts when I didn't. I've never ignored my instincts since, and every night after that, when I finally did decide to leave my house, my mom would walk with me all the way up until I turned 13 to come back to live with my dad. And that, to date, is the scariest thing I think I've ever experienced. It's some you only hear of on the news and nobody ever assumed it will happen to them. But my life was a mere 20 seconds from being completely different. Always believed my old childhood home was haunted, as me, my mom, my dad, my sister, and my aunt all had experiences there. Those are just the ones I explicitly know of. There's likely more people who've experienced things. My grandfather worked his ass off to build the home and get everything set up, and we were inclined to believe he kept watch over us regularly after his tragically early passing. None of his grandchildren ever got the chance to meet him. However, according to my mom, I had seen him sitting on his old wooden stereo that spanned the length of our dining room wall when I was a toddler. I don't remember that experience because of how young I was. I asked her, "Who is that man here?" And she responded with, "What man?" And I walked over to him, acted as if I was patting his leg, and said, "It's okay. I see you." If I recall correctly, I think I even pointed him out in a picture as the person I saw. There were several other, mostly minor instances that weren't too difficult to rationalize that occurred to all of us, but I'll share the spookiest thing that happened to me during my middle school years. One night, I kept hearing creaks, cracks, and knocks near my bedroom door and in the hallway just beyond it. My bed was positioned where I couldn't see directly into the hallway, and my door had to remain open to supply heat to the rest of the house, as the vent in my room worked better than any of the others. These noises occasionally happened for small stretches, some nights, and I don't know exactly how to describe their frequency, but I will say that they always seemed deliberate and relatively intelligent, like whatever was making the noises was acutely aware of if I was paying attention to it or not. The noises would usually die down when I actively listened to or looked for them, and if I outright ignored them, they'd usually stop after a bit, or I'd just fall asleep in spite of them, which was admittedly rare because this spooked me a lot as a kid. This particular night, however, they were a bit more aggressive, almost like there was a certain excitement to them. They continued for a few hours in the middle of the night while everyone else was asleep. I'd say roughly from 10 or 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. is when this took place. I could not sleep at all, and every time I started to drift off, the noises became much heavier. So I figured I'd read a book to make me as sleepy as possible. I grabbed a Bible and read the most boring passages I could find. I was to the point where I was drifting off with the overhead light on and me on my side with my head propped up in my hand, like I was trying to do a pose or something. And every single time I began to doze, I'd be woken up by these noises. I'd finally had enough and decided I'd sleep in my mom's room if she'd let me. It always felt like her room was afforded a certain sense of privacy, further lending to our theory of it being my grandfather. This is where things went from, I can maybe rationalize this, to, this is freaking insane. I closed the book, set it on my nightstand, got up, and began walking to the door when I started hearing crinkling behind me. Us kids had ruined a mattress or two in the past by spilling stuff on them, so the plastic wrapping was left on our current ones for easier cleanup and to avoid having to buy new ones in such cases. Now sometimes there would absolutely be a little crinkling heard after getting up off of it, but this time it was quite a bit louder and lasted longer. I got to my door, realized it was still crinkling, and my curiosity got the better of me. I turned around, and I could see the material moving on the side of the mattress. There was an impression in it, moving from the lower end up towards the headboard, like someone was brushing up against it, walking by. I immediately noped the hell out of there, and as I was speed walking, I didn't run because I didn't want to wake everyone else up. Down the hallway, I thought I heard footsteps behind me. I got to my mom's room at the other end of the house, woke her up, and asked, "Can I sleep in here tonight?" She asked, "Why? What's wrong?" And I stammered, saying, I don't know. There's something out there. She said, "Well, do you have your pillow? You're not taking mine." I didn't, so I went back to get one of mine. When I approached the hallway, the footsteps started up again, directly behind me this time. Again, curiosity got to me. I've always been fascinated by the paranormal, but part of me was also hoping, with every fiber of my being, that I could find a rational explanation. I stopped halfway down the hallway and listened, thinking maybe it's just the echo of my own footsteps or something, even though I'd never once heard an echo in that house. As soon as I stopped, I heard another 2 steps behind me that sounded like it was getting closer to me. I stayed still for a split second, but when I realized that the second step I heard after I stopped was maybe a foot away from me, and the first one was farther away, meaning I was being followed, I stopped worrying about not waking anyone else up. I sprinted to my bed, snatched a pillow up, and sprinted back to my mom's room, hearing extra footsteps in the hallway, no longer following me up until I got close to her door. I fell asleep probably close to a half an hour later, and the next day I tried to just let it go. Not necessarily forget about it, but just let it not get to me. After all, I never explicitly felt threatened by a presence in the house. Been spooked a few times, but that was the closest it ever felt like it was specifically messing with me. I didn't realize until after getting back home from school the next afternoon and hearing my mom on the phone that it was my grandma's birthday. Something that I learned years later as an adult and living in a different house was that my grandfather always loved celebrating and making a big deal of my grandma's birthday. Maybe he was just celebrating that particular night, or in his own way, preparing for her birthday the next day. But certain things began to make a lot of sense in hindsight, at least as much as they can for something paranormal, as around that time of year was when I would tend to have more of my unexplained experiences. Anyways, thanks to anyone who took the time to read this.